It's been 39 years since the deadly bombing of an Air India flight. But the wounds are still fresh for the families of 329 people who died. And it has forever cast a shadow on ties between India and Canada. On the 23rd of June 1985, an Air India flight was travelling from Canada to India via London. The Boeing 747 was named after the Emperor Kanishka. The plane exploded off the Irish coast, killing all 329 passengers and crew on board. The cause was a bomb in a suitcase that was transferred to the flight even though the ticket holder had not boarded. The victims included 268 Canadian citizens, mostly of Indian origin, and 24 Indians. Less than half of the bodies were retrieved from the sea. It was one of the deadliest acts of aviation terrorism. Canadian and Indian investigations concluded that the bombings were planned and executed by Sikh separatists based in Canada, working under the instructions of militants who were active in Punjab. The investigators said the bombings had been carried out by the Babbar Khalsa group as revenge for Operation Blue Star, during which the Indian Army had entered the Golden Temple in 1984 to flush out militants led by Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. The investigations revolved around four main accused: Talvinder Singh Parmar, Ripu Daman Singh Malik, Inderjeet Singh Rayat, and Ajayb Singh Bagri, all of whom were Canadian citizens. Parmar was seen as the mastermind of the attack, but the charges against him were dropped and he was later killed by the police in India in 1992. Malik and Bagri were arrested in 2000 on charges of mass murder and conspiracy. But in 2005, both men were acquitted of all charges. In 2022, Ripu Daman Singh Malik was shot dead in his car in Surrey, British Columbia, in what police described as a targeted killing. Rayat was the only person to be convicted. In 2003, he pleaded guilty in a Canadian court to manslaughter in connection with the bombing of Flight 182 and spent 12 years in jail before being released in 2016. Before the bombing, there were rumours for months among the Indian diaspora in Canada that something big was going to happen. The Indian Intelligence Bureau sent out a telex to both Canadian authorities and the Air India administration on the 1st of June 1985, asking them to take security measures against a possible airplane attack by Sikh extremists. Days before the bombing, Canadian intelligence operatives who were tracking Talvinder Singh Parmar heard an explosives test that he conducted in a forest. They ignored it, thinking it was a gunshot. Canadian authorities have been accused of not doing enough to prevent the attack and for botching up the investigation. Families of the victims were outraged by the acquittal of Malik and Bagri. So the Canadian government set up a public inquiry in 2006, headed by a former Supreme Court judge, to look into the bombing. 4 years later, the committee concluded that a cascading series of errors led to the largest mass murder in Canadian history. Then Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper offered a public apology to the families of the victims. He said their legitimate need for answers and indeed for empathy were treated with administrative disdain for years. Even after nearly 4 decades, the Air India bombing evokes painful memories in India. Most of the victims were Canadian citizens of Indian origin. The overwhelming sentiment in India is that justice has not been delivered to them. India has accused Canada of giving space to pro-Khalistan elements on its soil. And when the Canadian Parliament observed silence in the memory of known Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the Indian Consulate General in Vancouver announced a memorial service to pay tribute to the victims of the Kanishka flight bombing. That Canada's neglect led to the killing of 329 people, and a mismanaged investigation failed to provide any justice or closure to the families of the victims.